Ever since its release in early 2018, I've been actively following the developments of Dragon Ball FighterZ, and even though I have my complaints, like them doing my man SS Vegeta dirty for so many years, I'd still very much call myself an active fan of the game. It's the only time I've been pushed to learn a fighting game that isn't Smash Bros, and I'd be lying if I said it wasn't because of its character roster. Dragon Ball is quite possibly my favorite media franchise on the planet, so having what is essentially a virtual toy box to bash figures of my favorite characters together is very cathartic. The game has already included some amazing choices for playable fighters, Super Broly and Baby being some of my favorite additions, but I still have my nitpicks and don't particularly think this roster is balanced. And I don't mean in terms of viability, although to be honest it's lacking in that department too. I more so mean the quantity of characters from specific eras and series. Z and Super are the clear favorites when it comes to character selection, and while I don't agree with it, I get it. The Z era is the most popular part of the franchise to this day, and Super is the new one, so it makes sense they get top billing. I just think it's a bit sad that Arc System Works and Bandai Namco seem to be largely ignoring aspects of the series I believe should be appreciated more. Which leads me to my wish list. This is by no means intended to be a prediction video. This is purely my opinions on what I would like to see in a DBFZ sequel. Due to the monumental success of the game, I don't see a scenario where there isn't another entry, but in case you are watching from that future, consider this video as a time capsule. It is also worth noting that this list is not in any particular order. So, without further ado, let's get started. It's no secret that out of all of the potential eras to pull characters from, the original Dragon Ball series is the most ignored. Now this isn't technically true. As far as the Japanese manga is concerned, Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z are one series. However, calling characters like Yamcha or Tenshinhan original Dragon Ball representation feels like a bit of a cop-out. I'm talking about including someone who is by all means representative of that original era. I feel like it's safe to say that one of the most iconic things from the original series is the Red Ribbon Army. If it wasn't before, it certainly is now, given that they made an entire movie about their return with Superhero. As for a character to take from it, I could easily see them going with Gamma 2 from said film, as he's easily the fan favorite. And believe me, I like Gamma 2 as much as the next guy, and I do hope he gets in, but I feel that a more interesting character to represent the threat of the Red Ribbon Army is, ironically, someone who is not even a member, Tao Pai Pai. The introduction of Tao Pai Pai into the series is the first big shift in tone for the franchise, with him killing Bora setting the stage for many more serious deaths in the story. But above all else, I just think he's an entertaining personality. I know it sounds funny given his cold-blooded murders, but everything from flying on a pole to his jacket saying "kill you" to him having an anniversary shell on his assassinations always makes me smile. That sort of dry humor is what Toriyama is famous for, and it's one of my favorite things about early Dragon Ball. His appearance could be based off of his original design from when he fights Goku below Karin's tower, with a possible alternate costume based on his cyborg form from the 23rd Tenkaichi Budokai. We can just assume that he had some of those robotic enhancements applied to his original form, allowing him to disconnect his hands for some attacks akin to number 16, and even fly. Given that he's the brother of the Crane Hermit, whose disciples are the poster children for flight, I don't think it's that much of a creative liberty. The rest of his normals could be similar to Tenshinhan, with a lot of heavy kicks and open-handed jabs. He could have a special move where he throws a grenade in a chosen direction, a level 1 where he uses his signature Dodonpa, and a level 3 where he unleashes the Super Dodonpa from the tournament. Take everything I said regarding the death of Bora and raise that exponentially for the death of Kuririn. The Piccolo Daimao arc is one of the most important arcs in all of Dragon Ball, firmly establishing a more serious tone and introducing a fan-favorite villain in the titular Piccolo Daimao. This is definitely the most obvious choice for an original series character, and is the first villain that I would say holds a candle in strength and intimidation to those of the Z era. And I mean, what else is there to say about this guy? He's the Great Demon King. The only argument I could see against his inclusion is that he might overlap too much with Piccolo Jr., but given how many Gokus there are in the game and how much Daimao fights in the series, there are plenty of ways to create a unique playstyle. His appearance could be based on his younger self, maybe have him kill Shenlong for his intro animation. They could go down the install route, having him start out old and regain his strength with a super, but I don't really know if that would fit him. I have more to say about the potential for installs, but I'll get to that later. Piccolo Daimao is a character who tends to fight at a distance due to his extremely long limbs and ability to create small explosions from the ground. So I'd imagine him sharing a similar archetype to Kula, big, long-range normals with below-average frame data, but a lot of reward in damage and positional safety. He could have a command grab like Z Broly, an I-beam for zone control and combo extensions, 2 level 1 supers where he shoots a mouth beam and creates an explosion across the screen just like Nappa, and a level 3 where he charges up and shoots his massive two-handed blast, similar to Piccolo Jr. super. Also, he should obviously have a dramatic finish where he gets impaled by Kid Goku. Speaking of... Great! I'd like to talk about the next two characters at once, as my desire for them stems from the same reason. One thing that bothered me about the game as more characters got in was the insistence that alternate forms of said characters should be relegated to separate character slots, instead of installs for those characters. One of the most iconic elements of Dragon Ball are the transformations, and while not everyone could or should transform, I still think it's an avenue that developers should consider pursuing. Imagine having a more homogenized version of Goku, taking different moves from certain eras of the character and creating a Z Goku. He could start off as base, then through a super transform into Super Saiyan, then Super Saiyan 3. With this logic, you could also have a Super Goku, starting in God, then Blue, then Ultra Instinct. You could use the same logic for Vegeta, having Base, SS1, and SS2 for Z, and Blue, Blue Evolved, and Freaky Face Mode for Super. As for what could change, I'd imagine you'd get access to additional moves. For example, Z Goku would only unlock the Teleport Kamehameha after reaching SS1, and Super Goku only gets the Teleports Behind You Nothing Personal Kid when he reaches UI. I like this approach to character design because it means getting more content and fan service for less effort on the developer's part. Sure, making a character that can transform will take more time, but some don't really need to transform and some straight up can't. Plus, doing it this way lessens the need to dedicate even more development time to several versions of the same character. That being said, it is unavoidable to be able to represent all versions of a character like Goku with only 2 slots. He's been in the series the longest and has the most variety and options for combat. Because of this, I'd like to introduce 2 more versions of Goku to the game, each with plenty of potential for an interesting moveset: Kid Goku from Dragon Ball and Super Saiyan 4 Goku from GT. This is also going under the assumption that the next game will have a much different roster from the first game, as having these 2 characters in the same game as GT Goku would be somewhat redundant. However, I'd be one to argue that GT Goku is the redundant one. He was very clearly included to please fans of these 2 versions of the character by combining them into one, but since they ended up having a playable Super Saiyan 4 anyway, it makes me wonder why they didn't just have Kid Goku from the beginning. Whatever the reason was, let's get back to the new characters. The biggest hurdle for Kid Goku in FighterZ is that he can't fly, and Super Dash is a universal mechanic. This was altered for Roshi by giving him a unique jumping ability and an air Kamehameha, but I don't want to repeat that for Kid Goku. It's a little too specialized and unintuitive of an option. Instead, I'd let him have a regular Super Dash, with the only difference being that instead of flying himself, he would quickly summon Kitoon. It's a magical flying cloud after all, so it's capable of achieving some incredible feats. As for moves, you could take a lot from GT Goku and how he handles the Nyoibo, as well as the reverse Kamehameha. For the rest of his kit, there's a ton of source material for him. A notable move I would like to see included would be a Rekka based on the Janken, with rock, paper, and scissors being assigned to different attack buttons with different effects on block. For supers, his level 1 could have him use his classic Kamehameha, and for a level 3, he could have 2. His first level 3 would have him kick the opponent into the air before blasting the ground with a beam to launch himself through their torso, like he did with Piccolo Daimao. And his second one could be an Ozaru super, similar to Baby's. For it, Goku will transform into an Ozaru and rampage around, before throwing a giant piece of debris on the opponent. Goku then reverts to normal as the animation ends and the fight continues. As for SS4 Goku, his kit would be very easy to make. Since he doesn't transform, they would only need to worry about giving him one set of moves. Now for whatever reason, Goku punches directly through a lot of people in GT, showing that he has a fondness for hand-to-hand combat, which fits SS4 as the physical embodiment of the Ozaru's power and brutality in a humanoid form. Because of this, SS4 Goku would be one to favor a rushdown playstyle instead of the jack-of-all-trades approach taken with the other Gokus. He would still have a Ki Blast, but I'd imagine it would work like Bardock's, just a quick harassment tool that doesn't really lead to anything meaningful. He could have a command grab special where he grabs the foe by their leg and throws them into the wall. His level 1 could be his iconic 10 times Kamehameha, and his level 3 would without a doubt be his famous Dragon Fist explosion against the 3-star dragon.
Fantastic!
Since I'm already criticizing FighterZ for its character design, I'd like to mention what is easily my biggest issue with the game, and that is archetype variety, more specifically the lack thereof. Now don't get me wrong, there are plenty of examples of different archetypes in the game. Just take a look at the characters I play. Gogeta 4 is a rushdown character. He's got incredible close quarters tools, if not the best in the game, ways to guarantee plus frames, a command grab, and a level up taunt that forces the opponent to get within your effective range. This is balanced out by him not having very good full screen options. He doesn't have a beam, and while his Ki Blast is high priority, it doesn't reach very far. Super Broly is a grappler. His game plan is to predict and react to how the opponent will try to escape pressure with his abnormally high amount of command grabs. He has 6 of them. And once his shirt is off, you can kiss your health goodbye. This is balanced out by his block strings being insanely short, him having the slowest light in the game, which makes 5L into Dragon Rush a lot riskier, and generally possessing subpar frame data. And finally, Baby is the textbook definition of a zoner. All of his Ki Blasts have a passive mechanic that allows them to return if whiffed, as long as he isn't hit or is forced to block. He even has the ability to use the opponent's assists after killing them. All of this fits his invasive nature as a parasite, controlling his hosts, never letting up assault even when literally backed into a corner. This is balanced out by his normals and zoning options being generally unsafe up close, leaving him wide open if blocked. Now that all sounds nice, and would definitely contribute to a variety of playstyles in the roster. The problem is that it doesn't. Gogeta is a rushdown character, but he has a lariat that travels near full screen if used from a dash, then literally full screen, and his 2 air dashes allow for an insane amount of aerial mobility that most other characters can't match. Super Broly is a grappler, but he has one of the most oppressive zoning tools in the game with his Eraser Blow, or as I call it, the Booger, and Baby is only decent at zoning, because 1, most characters have a million tools to counteract it, 2, this game lacks any form of meaningful chip damage, and 3, he doesn't even have the best Ki Blast game. Z Broly does, and he's a grappler. The best zoner in the game is a grappler. The problem is less so the the lack of archetypes and more so the incredibly confused archetypes. More often than not, the developers solve these issues by making a character good at everything, rather than buffing what their proficiency should be. This design philosophy led to the eventual creation of Labcoat 21, a character so problematic that she had to be banned for a period of time. With that being said, there are more ways to bring different playstyles to a game without solely relying on archetypes, and that is focusing on what only a specific character can do. Think about how Roshi has a unique super dash, or how Ginyu can steal an opponent's body. These kinds of mechanics require additional care to be put into their design to stop them from being too over-centralizing, and while sometimes they can be seen as a hindrance, other times they're a blessing in disguise. In an ideal world, the game would be balanced around the existence of archetypes. Rushdowns would struggle from full screen, grapplers would lack strong zoning options, and zoners should be able to thrive. This radical rebalance to the game could allow for the introduction of a new archetype, and more interestingly, a character with a mechanic that only they themselves can do. I'm talking about the introduction of a counter zoner, and the most fitting person, or robot, for that role is Artificial Human number 20, Dr. Garrow.
I'm Dr. Garrow, or Giro, or whatever.
Dr. Garrow's signature mechanic is that he doesn't have a reflect. Instead, he absorbs ki through his palms and adds it to his own. That's it. Immediately, you have a character whose playstyle is not only radically different from everyone else, but also radically changes how every other character plays against him. I'll be the first to admit that this idea is not my own. I first heard of its existence from known fighting game innovator Clayton Chapman, but I feel the need to mention it as I love the concept and would be really interested in seeing it implemented. As for the rest of his moves, you can really do whatever else you want. You can call in number 19 for some support moves, have the obligatory eye laser super, etc. Some stuff would need to be made up for him or taken from other games, but that's fine, he's already plenty unique as is.
Amazing!
I'm now moving on from a character who has a gimmick to someone who is a gimmick. Most fighting games tend to have a character who exists purely for the sake of a joke. In Smash 64 it was Jigglypuff, in Street Fighter it's Dan, and in DBFZ it would be Mr. Satan. What makes a joke character interesting to me is when the way that they function in the game is at odds with how the rest of the game is designed. As for the aforementioned example of Jigglypuff, she's a character designed for a platform fighter. Yet since she is a living balloon, she can ignore that platforming entirely. Every character has a universal defensive option in their shield, so wouldn't it be funny if breaking hers meant instant death? And look, she has this cute little animation of her sleeping, how sweet. I want Mr. Satan to be a character who cheats the system, with many unorthodox moves and mechanics never before seen in fighters, fitting for the bumbling yet well-meaning con man he is. Obviously there's the issue of flight, as was the same with Kid Goku, except it's made worse by there not being such a suitable replacement. This is where Arxis would need to get creative. I've seen concepts for him before that adapt him as the master of martial arts he claims to be, letting him fly and become Super Satan, under the idea that the match was a story he made up for the media. And while that is funny and entirely in character, I think it would be more entertaining to just have Mr. Satan as the buffoon he is in the game, with no special powers involved. Now because he can't fly, and because he'll be such a specialized character, I don't feel bad in plagiarizing the Master's Leap from Roshi. As for what he would do in the air, I'm sure they could figure something out. For his normals, he would use the expected fare of punch and kick flurries, with his dynamite kick as a level 1, and his Satan Miracle Special Ultra Super Megaton Punch as his level 3. I also think that he should be like Vidal and have a spot dodge instead of a reflect, as there are plenty of moments in the show where he unintentionally dodges attacks while trying to beg for mercy. Comparatively lame attacks for a comparatively lame guy. I'm sure that they could find a way to spice these moves up with some flashy effects and funny poses. Where things really start to get crazy are in his specials. More so than any other character on the roster, if someone is to be given a taunt, it should be Mr. Satan. For one of his special moves, he will stand out in the open and taunt the foe. What he'll do doesn't really matter, but what does matter is the effect that it will have. Whatever happens is dependent on the attack button you performed the special with. Maybe one could drain ki from the opponent, another could disable assists, other weird gimmicky nonsense. To further emphasize his gimmicky nature, I think it would be really funny if spamming this attack would cause it to randomly fail and have Mr. Satan trip over himself, leaving him wide open. I know randomness is not very well liked in the context of fighting games, as it can lead to a lot of unpredictable outcomes. But I say screw it, because I think it would be really funny. In fact, I like this idea so much that I'm giving him another one. His 5S could have him toss out an item, in the exact same manner as Faust in Guilty Gear. Just like Faust, the unpredictability would come in the item he pulls, not in the opponent's ability to counteract it. The animation would have quite a long startup, with him rearing his arm back to chuck an item across the stage. The arc the item flies in is always consistent, giving foes ample time to react to what he's throwing, have it be a box of chocolates, a stick of dynamite, maybe even number 16's head. As for the effects they could have, the team has free reign to have fun. Mr. Satan is a massive gimmick, and the more you embrace that, the better.
Wonderful!
I can't really explain why I like Zarbon so much, I just kind of do. I like his design, I like his fighting style, I like his personality, I like his monster form, I just like him. He's not really a character you often hear requests for, but he's still plenty popular, and it's not like he doesn't have potential. He has plenty of screen time as Frieza's right-hand man, and he has 2 very memorable fights to pull from. He has all the makings for a DBFZ character. He punches, he kicks, he swipes, he's got a beam. For level 1, he could use this aerial ki blast, and his level 3 could be when he grabs Vegeta and throws him into the ground. The only thing truly up in the air about his design would be his appearance. Would he be in his normal pretty boy form or his monster transformation? You can make a case for him starting out in his normal form and having an install that makes him big, but the models are so different in size that the developers would essentially have to reanimate him from scratch. FighterZ tends to go with the strongest form of a character in scenarios like these, think Kula and Cell, so he'd probably start the match in his monster form. But they could also do what they did with GT Goku, and have him transform for his level 3 and revert back when the animation is over. He's far from the most unique newcomer and isn't winning any popularity contests, but I still feel that he has enough legacy in the series, and he could easily work if they decided to add him to the game.
Excellent!
The remaining 3 characters are ones that I would consider a lock for a Dragon Ball FighterZ sequel, and if they aren't, I'd be very surprised. Starting off this tier of character is one that hasn't even appeared in animation yet, the Planet Eater Moro from the Dragon Ball Super manga. As it stands right now, the Moro arc is undoubtedly the fan-favorite arc of Super for those that have read the manga, and I very much agree. I certainly enjoyed it quite a bit, which for me is really saying something. This is due in no small part to the character of Moro and the very interesting powers he brings to the table. Now unfortunately, picking an appearance for him isn't so easy. As mentioned with Zarbon, they tend to go with the strongest form. The reason why this irks me so much is because by that logic, the Moro that we would get in the game would be him after he absorbed 7-3, which I would hate because I vastly prefer Goat Moro. To be fair, the designs are similar enough that they could make this a case for transformation, so if they could find a way to make that work, I would very much appreciate that. However they decide to do it, the moves would stay the same. By far the most iconic thing about Moro, outside of his planet-altering powers, is his ability to drain ki from his opponents as he fights them. Along with that, after gaining the powers of 7-3, he is also capable of copying the abilities of anyone he grabs for a short time. So how will this work in FighterZ? Well, I actually had a bit of decision paralysis, because there are a ton of different ways to interpret this. You can make Moro similar to my proposal for Dr. Gero, gaining meter as he reflects attacks. Conversely, you could have it translate to a damage buff instead, literally making him stronger the more he steals from the opponent. He could have a command grab that disables an attack of the character he grabs for a short time, or if the game does go the installs route, maybe he could literally revert transformations. This is all purely conceptual and I don't really have an answer. However, I prefer to keep his playstyle unique from Dr. Gero's if it can be done. As for the rest of his attacks, this is where you can adapt his planet-altering powers. He could have a special move that has him crash waves across the screen, a full screen level 1 where he erupts pillars of energy from the ground, and a level 3 where he creates a massive ball from the planet's ki and throws it at the opponent.
Extreme!
Out of all of the characters in Dragon Ball outside of Yamcha, Raditz is the one that I think has the most undeserved hate. I don't really understand why people are so hard on him. Sure, he may be weak compared to Vegeta and Nappa, but so was Frieza when compared to Cell, or Cell when compared to Majin Buu. What matters most is how effective they are as a villain for their time, and Raditz was certainly effective. I think it's easy to forget just how important Raditz is to the Dragon Ball franchise. His declaration of Goku's alien heritage doesn't really mean much when you barely know who Goku is, but for people following the series from its inception, that was a massive deal. Considering his status as Goku's brother, and him being the one to introduce space travel to the series, not even mentioning that he's the first villain most fans were exposed to in the West, he's clearly worthy of a spot in FighterZ. Despite not being in the series very long, he's got a lot of moves to choose from. I'd imagine he'd have normals similar to Nappa, with slow but strong chops, elbow strikes, and knee attacks. For his beam, he could throw a ki blast that explodes, have an off-the-ground move where he stomps on the opponent's chest, unleash this attack we don't get to see him use in the manga for his level 1, and use his classic double Sunday attack for his level 3. I don't know why it's called that, just roll with it. At the beginning of this video, I said that this list was in no particular order, and that was true. However, I would make a possible exception for this choice. Back when Gogeta 4 was released, I remember feeling a great sense of finality. He was the last character of Season 3, and the reveal trailer really seemed like it was the end, and I found that very fitting. He wasn't my most requested character, or even the most unique in terms of gameplay, but I don't think I would have accepted anyone else as the final character. The Dragon Ball fanbase tends to obsess over the small things, like how big a character's battle power is, or how the flashy new transformation stacks up against the others. I haven't really been one to engage in that part of the series, as I tend to like Dragon Ball more for its story and characters. Now don't get me wrong, I like action. Some of my favorite moments in Dragon Ball are moments of action, but I've never been one to swoon over certain fan-favorite characters whose reason for existence is action for action's sake. However, I can make an exception for Gogeta 4. Try to take your mind back to before the modern Dragon Ball revival, before Super or Battle of Gods, before Dragon Ball Kai or the 2008 OVA, back when the series was, for all intents and purposes, over. Back then, there was no character more sacred than Gogeta 4. He wasn't just that guy who showed up for a single episode of GT, he was the combination of the series' two most popular characters, the pinnacle of Super Saiyan through SS4, and the ultimate culmination of strength throughout all of the original run. Gogeta 4 was the ultimate weapon of Dragon Ball, the perfect ending for DLC. and then they added Lab Coat 21, but the point still stands. But it did leave me wondering, who else could have ended the game? Who else was worthy enough to share that level of mysticism? Well, as was the same with Gogeta 4, this character is not my most requested, nor the most unique in terms of gameplay, but he's clearly the right choice for the job. He's the ultimate culmination of evil, the last obstacle for our heroes to thwart, the final boss of Dragon Ball, Yi Jinglong, the one-star dragon. This is a very expected request. In fact, I and many others believed that he would get in the game eventually, but once Baby was revealed, which to be fair is a character I wanted in the game a lot more, I had my doubts. Frankly, I still think it's weird that he got passed up on. Maybe I'm looking too deep into the narrative relevance of an inclusion like this, but even disregarding that, he's still a fan-favorite character with a lot of moveset potential. The most obvious thing to do with him is to give him a mechanic centered around gathering Dragon Balls, which would unlock additional moves or change the ones he already has, and I like that idea a lot. As it stands right now, the Dragon Balls are a very underutilized mechanic, but there are ways to get around this. They could give one-star a move like Gogeta that gives Dragon Balls, or they could rework the whole system for the next game to make obtaining them a lot more viable. The moves one-star would unlock would be the elemental powers of the other evil dragons. The 4-star ball would let him surround himself in fire, and the 2-star ball would have him spit poison that causes damage over time, so on and so forth. As long as 1-star is on the field, the dragon can't be summoned, as the Dragon Balls that are obtained are absorbed by 1-star. Once he's killed, the dragon can be used again, but several of the balls would be lost and would have to be regained. Now, by this logic, Yi Jinglong would never be able to get a wish himself, so I think he should be benefited in a way other than just his new powers if he obtains all 7 balls. This character is already one that snowballs hard, so whatever that buff would be shouldn't make comebacks against him impossible, just a bit more difficult than usual. As for his moves, he tends to fight very directly. He's not one to zone with ki blasts or bring the fight to him. He's the kind to rush in and punch you in the face. He also tends to attack with his legs a lot, so I can see a special move similar to Super Saiyan Goku's Kick Flurry, along with having a J2L dive kick like Baby. As for supers, he could use this full screen explosion as a level 1, and his signature minus energy power ball as his level 3. And of course, he could have a dramatic finish with SS4 Goku, where Goku would revert back to his kid form, create a massive Genki Dama, and use it to kill Yi Jinglong once and for all. Now, will you look at that, GT Goku does get to be in the game after all. And that's the list. There are plenty of other characters I considered mentioning, but I only felt like including the ones that I had enough to say about. For a lightning round of characters that I'd like to see, I think Tullus would be really cool. Tapion is a great character, but lacks source material. Pan and Oob would fit for GT picks, especially considering how close Super is getting to the end of Z. I'm a big fan of the Jocko manga, so if he got in, I'd be really happy. Arale would be the perfect guest character, and while I don't ever see this happening, I think it would be amazing to have Pilaf, Shu, and Mai in their giant combined mech. There are plenty of other things I want for a Fighter sequel as well. For one, more stages. It is so baffling to me that over the several years of DLC and free content drops, only one additional stage was included, and it's not even based on anything. I know the joke with Dragon Ball is that all of its fights take place on desolate wastelands, but whereas Kame House, or God's Palace, or Hell from DBZ Movie 12, or even the Tournament of Power Arena, anything is better than this. A more fleshed out single player mode would be greatly appreciated as well, and I don't mean the story arc structure the game currently has. I beat the mode once when it came out, booted it up a couple years later out of boredom, and it couldn't retain my attention during the first cutscene. I'd like something that is quick and repeatable, like a Smash Ultimate Classic mode, where each character is given a set of opponents to fight, all based around a certain theme. Goku's route could have him fight all the main villains of Z, whereas Baby's route could comprise of fights against all the Saiyan characters. This idea is overflowing with fan service potential, alongside being a fun way to kill time, so I do really hope something like this happens. Regardless of who they decide to add or what modes they decide to introduce, I have faith that DBFZ2 will be a good game. That's a pretty dangerous philosophy in this modern era of gaming we find ourselves in, but from the literal years I've spent playing, the countless matches I've won and lost, and the hours I've spent writing this video purely out of a love for the game, the developers have proven to me that they can definitely make something that is, at the very least, fun to engage with. Which, at the end of the day, is the most important thing. Whatever the future holds for the series is something we'll have to wait and see. I don't really have a joke to end this video on, so, goodbye.